us today. I want to introduce myself, Joab Ortiz with Burns & McDonnell, also chairman of the board of the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. I want to give a special thank you to the local and state elected officials who have joined us today, as well as the board members and staff who are currently on the meeting. I would also like to thank our sponsors for helping us put all these things together, working hard to advocating and supporting our members. The Chamber is proud to host today's candidate forum with Ms. Amanda Adkins. Thank you, Ms. Adkins, for joining us today. We look forward to your remarks, and I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. As a business membership organization and a community partner, we closely monitor local, state, and national legislation that impacts our community, Wyandotte County, and the Kansas City metro area. And we are advocates for business and keeping business running and vibrant in our community. It is with great pleasure that we get the opportunity to introduce you to the membership and have a chance to speak with you. So today our moderator is going to be Stephen Durst, who's from Frederico Consulting. Stephen is with the lobbying firm that works on behalf of the Chamber in Topeka. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen, and we'll get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Durst, and on behalf of the KCK Chamber of Commerce, we thank you for joining us for today's candidate forum featuring Ms. Amanda Adkins. I would like to begin by thanking KCK Board Chairman Joab Ortiz, Mike Smallwood, who's the chair of the Legislative Affairs Committee, and Daniel Silva, your president and CEO of the Chamber, for all of their hard work on this event. There is no doubt that this organization is tremendously well run and works tirelessly for its members. So great value for you all, and thanks to those folks for putting this together. Before we introduced our guests for today, I want to remind our viewers that all questions have been approved by designees of the KCK Chamber and staff. After my introduction, I will turn it over to Ms. Adkins for her opening statement, and then we'll proceed with questions. So with that, I am proud to introduce Amanda Adkins, who is a current candidate for the Kansas 3rd Congressional District. For the past 15 years, she was an executive at the Cerner Corporation. She was also the former chairwoman of the Kansas Republican Party from 2009 until 2013. She was also chair of the State of Kansas Children's Cabinet and founder of the Systems of Care Initiative. She is a KU graduate and has lived in Overland Park for the past 17 years. She and her husband, Jason, have been married for 20 years and have 2 children. Amanda, welcome, and I'll let you begin with your opening statement. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm just honored that the Kansas City, Kansas Chamber would take the time to host this forum. I do want to share with everybody who's watching that I wish that we could have been in person, and I would have loved even more so if we had a full debate with both candidates joining at the same time. However, I'm still grateful for this time. So I am Amanda Adkins, and the most important thing that I can tell you is that I am a businesswoman and I'm an entrepreneur, and my primary focus as a candidate really is the economy. It is thriving business and it's thriving families in the 3rd Congressional District. Other things that you should know about me before we get started, and it's been a huge part of my campaign. My entire professional career, I really have been a builder crossing the Kansas City community and the Midwest. I've been a builder of business. As was noted, I have served as a senior executive leader at Cerner Corporation for 15 years. I've been focused on improving health in this great country and in cutting costs and making healthcare more affordable for individuals, families, and businesses. I've done a lot of work with employers related to healthcare and the decisions they make for their workforce. I've been a builder in politics, and also, as briefly noted, I've been a builder and focusing on solutions for at-risk kids and families in this community. Very specific to Kansas City, Kansas, and to Wyandotte County. If you did not know these things, of course, Cerner, my own company, has a presence in Wyandotte County. In addition to that, as part of the work that I've done for employers in the region, I did actually do work directly with the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, focused on workforce health, and the charity that I founded, Systems of Care Initiative. The first round of investments that we've made are in 3- and 4-year-old children in Wyandotte County. Last year, about 80. I think as we move into this year, another 100. And our goal really is for those small children to be ready for kindergarten. And the reason for that is that I really do believe that that we need to think of education as the system should be preparing our young people for the workforce. Another reason why, building a successful path for kids is really important to me. I've hired a lot of young people, and my own children are teenagers, and I'm, consulting them now, of course, and the decisions that they make so that they can choose the right path in terms of their own future profession. So I'm honored to be here with you. And the last thing I would say before we get started is people often ask me, Amanda, what kind of leader are you? What kind of leader would you be in Congress? And the most important thing you should know about me is that my focus is always on impact. It is about measurable and significant impact for individuals, families, and businesses. So I'm a businesswoman and an entrepreneur, and I look forward to spending time with all of you today.
Thank you very much, Amanda. With that, I'm going to jump right in. And as you probably could have guessed, I believe the first question out of the chute is going to be something COVID related, and it is. I'm going to take you all back to February 29th of this year. Washington State at that time was the first state in the country to confirm the death of a resident due to the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19. Since then, that virus has touched every aspect of our lives. And much of our conversation today will surround the many facets of COVID, just as the many decisions you will make, if elected, will surround it as well. Let's start with the economy, which in many ways the virus has devastated. Unemployment in May was near 14.7%, a rate not seen since the Great Depression and double that of the Great Recession. 20.6 million jobs were lost from March until May. And it was just reported this morning that there were 898,000 new applicants who applied for unemployment insurance last week. That's the highest number since August. This comes after a 50-year unemployment low in February. So to say it's been a roller coaster is a major understatement. And the figures released today would suggest that we are not out of the woods. I just want to start very generally, Ms. Adkins. How would you advocate that we get this economy back on track? Of course, a lot of unknowns, but generally speaking, what are your philosophies on how we can get this economy back on track?
No, I'm going to start and end with a simple statement, which is any steps that the federal government takes go forward, and any investments that are made, any dollars that are spent, it really does need to be centered on incentivizing work. So I'll go back to my intro, thriving business, thriving families, any steps that are taken need to be focused on incentivizing work. I do just want to quickly reflect, because you mentioned last spring that coming into being a candidate for U.S. Congress here in the 3rd, I think it is of critical importance that I have a lot of expertise both in healthcare and in business. Last spring, right as the infection rates started to pick up in this country, I did, as a result of that, release a 3-point plan related to COVID that focused early on the importance of testing, surveillance, risk mitigation, making sure that our healthcare providers were in fact very prepared if in fact there had been a surge. Of course, thankfully we didn't have a significant one, but we were prepared in this community. And then of course, focus on supply chain management changes as well, which since President Trump, has taken some steps to make sure that more medical supplies and drugs are manufactured here in the US, which I think is important. Specific to the economy and business, I spent that shutdown time period. And I just want to say to the business leaders who are on this call, I think that I know that it is really hindsight's 2020 and it's hard to go back, but we did make a mistake. I'm not, this whole notion of shutdown culture, a lot of our businesses, it all too well, you've lived through it, we're just decimated. And so that needs to not happen again. I use that time period to directly speak with small businesses in terms of how they were doing and the decisions that needed to be made, not only immediately in that moment, but over the longer term. As a result of that, I released a Path to Prosperity plan that's on my website, AmandaAdkins2020.com. And I just want to comment on the few elements of that plan. First, I did support some of the investments that were made in the early COVID relief packages because I thought it was a very, very important bridge in the midst of a crisis. And I would say of all the things that were done, the PPP loans clearly were an important part of that. And I've spoken with a number of business leaders crossing, the community regarding, that effort then and what still needs to be happened. In addition to that, a lot of businesses told me that they were most concerned about limiting liability. So that has been an important part of my focus. It was an important part of my Path to Prosperity plan as well. I also, because I want to see individuals and businesses invest and engage in more entrepreneurial endeavors. These are important steps if we want to see the economy thriving again. Also, very early on was a believer and a proponent of the payroll tax holiday idea, and not just deferment of the payroll tax, but forgiveness of it for a period of time. Because I understand, and again, folks, I've worked in business. I understand all too well that if you don't forgive it, particularly on the worker side, there's just too much confusion and concern. And so I've consistently stated that, as has President Trump and other economic leaders like Steve Forbes. So those were some of the early things that I did to be a proponent of the steps that we needed to take very quickly in order to get our economy and our roaring again and our businesses thriving. I just want to make, though, one more comment, and that is, we have some very important decisions to make here in near-term months. You all probably already know that Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she passed a $2.2 trillion package here not too long ago that has all sorts of things in it that are not focused on pushing the economy, to helping the economy thrive again. Just things like, subsidy, Obamacare subsidies for unemployment. We need to focus on the steps that should be taken so that business can start moving and people can be in a job, which I think is the most important thing we can do for families. So I think that the U.S. House has moved in the wrong direction. And I would just remind all of you that Sharice Davids has consistently she voted for Speaker Pelosi, and she has consistently voted with her. And there is a really big difference between really pushing and incentivizing more unemployment, lack of growth, shutting down business versus my view, which is we need to be incentivizing work and helping people to get back to work as quickly as possible. So as an example of that, continued focus on payroll tax holiday is one thing that I'm focused on. Limiting liability, of course, I will continue to be focused on. But I do think I've heard from a lot of parents that they're worried about having to choose between if their kids aren't in school, between school and work. So I think that we also need to take another look at things like, conservative solutions related to childcare. So hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of an insight into, my thinking on what needs to be done. And if you'd like a lot more detail, Path to Prosperity is on my website at AmandaAdkins2020.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adkins. I want to dig into a couple of the things you talked about. So start with the stay-at-home order that was issued in Kansas and in many states across the country. You touched on the reason why stay-at-home should never have happened. Decimated businesses. Some have argued it picked winners and losers. But then others would say that was necessary to flatten the curve, and we may have seen a little progress there and may have seen a little bit more progress had we stuck to it. What is your response to the other side of that argument?
Yeah, so but here's the problem though. There are a lot of post-secondary implications from pushing people to stay at home. And the most significant would be increased mental health risk. The Kaiser Family Foundation, some of you may be aware, renowned, healthcare think tank in the country, produced a series of polls basically looking back at, adults and their mindset in terms of mental health risk last spring and then moving into summer. And the number of people worried about anxiety and depression spiked. It went from in the mid 30s to up close to 60% in this country. That's a real risk. And by the way, in addition to mental health risk, we also saw a spike, continued issues with, comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension or high blood pressure. And by the way, all that does is increase additional risk for people if they do happen to become infected with COVID. Their likelihood of being sicker, it just becomes higher. And so people unfortunately haven't been talking about that enough. And back to I also want to comment on the relevance of that for children. Particularly for children who are in middle school and or high school, the heightened risk of mental health issues when they are stuck at home and they are not in a position to interact with their peers and with their teachers is really significant. And I don't have to tell, I bet my guess is that there are a number of people who are watching right now or will watch this who had kids at home in the midst of virtual learning. I myself did, and I can just say firsthand, it worked just fine for one of my kids and it really did not work for the other. And so there are a lot of worries regarding health implications, education outcomes. And then back to those of you who are running businesses, I also heard from people just this concern, I'll state it again, I don't want to have to choose between working and my child. And so we need to not forcing people to stay at home. This needs to not happen again. The secondary risks that are associated with it, in my opinion, far outweigh COVID risk, the limited numbers of individuals. And that is not because I'm not worried about infection rates. Of course I am. I've worked in healthcare and population health for a long time, but the secondary implications are huge. And by the way, as we all know, just devastating to our economy too, perhaps, most important.
Thank you for that. And we'll touch on some of the things you mentioned there, specifically childcare, work from home, the mass exodus of what experts say for parents in just a minute here. You touched on the Paycheck Protection Program. So massive part of one of our most recent stimulus bills, widely utilized, and some businesses have said that it was crucial to keeping their operations open. Small businesses, as we all know, were the primary beneficiaries of this program. The average loan size was around $110,000, and 87% of those loans was under $150,000. Almost 72,000 loans were given out in Kansas alone. And again, going back to that number, 87% under $150,000. I think the question needs to be asked. There are two questions, really. One, in this new round of stimulus funding, would you include something similar to the Paycheck Protection Program? And then two, what are your thoughts on an automatic forgiveness of loans under $150,000?
Yeah, I would, and I know that this has been a focus for President Trump. I would support additional PPP funding. I'll go back. I recognize this is a simple statement, but my goal go forward would be anything that we do should be focused on thriving business, thriving families, and we should be able to measure the results of it. I am also a big believer, and this has been consistent with the work that I've done in both healthcare and the work I've done in early childhood education, in saying that we don't want to spend tons more money because we've got a huge national federal debt, which everybody knows, I think it's now $7 trillion. So we should seek to be very, very targeted. We should be looking at where risks still exist and try to solve for the existing risks. So very, very targeted, which is why I've said, we should be thoughtful about exactly, where those money's going to, what businesses, the industries that are still suffering significantly, because there are, and this is a great thing, there are businesses here in Kansas City in this community that have and continue to do well. So I would just want to be very targeted about it. But of course, like steps that I'm going to take and encourage will be focused on helping business. I mean, I'm the business candidate here.
Before moving off the topic of stimulus, so you mentioned the Democrats' plan of $2.2 trillion. We've got the White House stimulus package at 1.8 that's out there. And then Tuesday, Leader McConnell said that he has a $500 billion package teed up and ready to go. So Paycheck Protection Program, we talked about that. What else might you include in a stimulus package? You've talked about it a little bit, but maybe top 3 to 5 things that you would really.
Yeah, I'm happy to restate. First of all, if I were all of you, I would be very wary of the 2.2 trillion package that Nancy Pelosi pushed through, because it's just a mix of socialist programs that they've thrown into the mix. And by the way, again, we need to be very targeted on the economy and on families thriving. So be wary of that, and be wary of the fact that Sharice Davids continually does support her and voted for her as speaker. I'll go back to some things I've already said. I think I do, pay PPP funding, yes. And I think most people, that's generally regarded as, top of the list. We need to focus on the economy. I still do believe the payroll tax holiday idea is something that can and should be included and pushed for a very defined period of time, because of course, we don't want to hurt Medicare. That's our commitment to our seniors. I said earlier, continuing to focus on limitation of liability, and it's not just for business. I would say also for schools and healthcare institutions as well, who are concerned right now, and I appreciate that very much, are some areas. And then the last one, because I've talked a lot, I'm a parent, and I've talked to a lot of parents about what they're going through right now. I also would be a supporter, because I've done a lot of work in high quality early childhood learning, of inclusion of something related to either education and or childcare subsidy for people who really needed it. Because again, we want people working, and parents are concerned about having to make that decision between their child and work right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, getting the mute button there figured out, as we've all had to do these last several months. So we'll move off the specifics of a stimulus plan into something you've talked about is, okay, there has to be a limit to what we spend here, because we can't just continue to spend our way out of this. That's what a lot of your colleagues would argue if you are elected. So you've said it, we're at debt levels not seen since World War II. It will only get larger if there is another stimulus package plan, any one of those three I described. So how do we pay for this stimulus package or future stimulus packages? Will there need to be a tax increase? What are your thoughts on that?
No to tax increases. I think I would say the opposite, which is, and I'm a consistent advocate for tax relief, not tax increases. And just, I want to comment on this really quick, because I think it's important, and it's a distinction between my opponent, Sharice Davids, and my own policy plans. So first, if you did not all know this about me, I have been a huge advocate for the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, both for the individual income tax cuts, which I think should be made permanent, and for businesses. I mean, even Kansas City, we are a global economy. We have a lot of industries that are selling here and abroad, and we've global businesses, and I support continuing to cut tax rates for businesses too, because it just helps us be more competitive. Again, Sharice Davids, completely in a different position in both those areas. So I want to support this tax relief. We're not going to raise taxes so long as I'm elected and in a leadership position. The bigger issue here is, it then comes down to, because we do have a huge federal debt of roughly $26.7 trillion, which, by the way, equates to something like $216,000 per taxpayer. If you do have kids, you should be horrified by that, because that is a lot of debt on their backs. Instead, what we need to do is be very thoughtful about where the federal government can and should be more efficient. We need to be thoughtful, and this is perhaps why it is great that I'm a business candidate. Cost benefit analysis. Clearly, upon evaluation, there are programs that have either outlived their use and or they're not performing. My commitment to all of you is that I seek to provide value for every single dollar spent. So the U.S. Congress needs to take a turn here as we're continuing to build forward, and consider what should government be focused on, what programs are effective, and make some changes. It should ultimately be about outcomes and about impact. So that's been a miss, actually, for many, many years. in Congress, just lack of leadership.
So following up on that, what should the federal government be focused on, in your opinion? And this is a fundamental question that's been raging for years. And I think that more than ever now, the sides are very divergent on their beliefs. So what are some of those focuses for the federal government?
For me, it's very simple. The federal government should be focused on those areas that are enumerated responsibilities in the United States Constitution. And it's really, ultimately a simple list. The federal government should be coining money, of course, but should be focused on national security, on regulation of commerce. It does make sense, which again, this brings in my experience in global business, that the federal government should be centered on, business in this country and outside when it comes to trade. So those are the primary areas here in this district, in the 3rd Congressional District, by the way. That's a nice match for what I find, people are concerned about. People choose to live here because they in general worry about growth, the economy. They do worry about affordable healthcare, high quality education, and security and safety, which has been a really hot topic within this election cycle. So it is for that reason that I am, both in terms of what people care about here and an appropriate role for the federal government, I have been most heavily focused on the economy and security as the top issues.
One thing I wanted to touch on, and I hadn't heard just kind of in our mention of stimulus and things like that, but and this has been talked about actually when the president was first elected, but infrastructure. So it's vital to the KCK community and the chamber. You look at things like the Turner Diagonal, you look at the 69 highway expansion, the Argentine rail yard. There's an airport being built across state line. So it really helps that manufacturing and business hub that we have in Wyandotte County in the 3rd District continue to grow. You mentioned some things that you think government should be focused on, but obviously Kansas has been luckily a recipient of some really good federal dollars that have come in to help some of these infrastructure projects. So a lot of different things the federal government needs to focus on right now, and there's a lot of different funding priorities, but infrastructure is a big one for this chamber. How can we keep those funds coming in, or what do you see as infrastructure in all this, because it is such a crucial part to our community?
Sure, no, I'm happy to comment on that. First of all, infrastructure is a core responsibility of the federal government. Both in terms of the economy and movement of goods, but also security as well. If you all did not know this, I happen to come from a builder family. I was raised, my father just retired as the president of a very large heavy construction company. So it's, in my blood, so to speak. Hence, I talk about being a builder. It's where I come from. I also have the good fortune of having been endorsed by and supported by the Associated General Contractors of America, and locally here too as well. So I did, in addition to spending time and writing a prosperity plan, I did write an infrastructure plan that's also on my website. The core areas that I focused on related to infrastructure, first are the importance of having a long-term and sustainable infrastructure plan, because it is critical, to the future of this country and the prosperity of this country. The one thing that I would say about that is that I do think that we're not going to solve for it just right here in the final weeks of this election cycle, but we do need to make a determination how we pay for that infrastructure plan, especially given all the money that's being spent on the COVID crisis right now. But I am a believer in it and a proponent of it. In addition to that, a lot of the leaders that I have known who work in and around construction, regardless of the type of construction, and a lot of their concerns are the same concerns that other business leaders have, related to workforce. I know that at one point, AGC had told me that they were worried about having a shortage of 1 million workers to finish projects, this year in 2020. Now, a lot of things have changed. Some projects are delayed, but nonetheless, having a workforce, and that feeds into an immigration discussion, is pretty critical. I also have had a lot of discussions with people who work in construction. Just about a desire to have a free and open and competitive process, and to not have the federal government overlaying a lot of additional burdens as they're trying to, complete their projects. And an example of this would be, and again, coming out of the current Democrat-led U.S. House of Representatives, the Green New Deal resolution as it was introduced, which it's really focused on trying to completely restructure how the U.S. economy works, inclusive of, our infrastructure projects. And I just don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. And so you all should know that I'm absolutely come from a builder family, laid out an infrastructure plan. That plan is not only, it's a commitment to a long-term plan, sustainable, have to figure out how we fund it, but also, being accountable to the actual employers who do the work and making it easy for them to bid in a, competitive environment and complete their projects. All those things I think are of critical importance.
You mentioned it, so I'm going to jump into it. Immigration, as it relates to workforce, as it relates to just current events as we know it right now, and certainly COVID has taken center stage, but prior to COVID, that was a large discussion in our country. So I'm going to read for you quickly, Ms. Adkins, from our legislative platform, which is available online as well. Quote, the KCK Chamber supports and encourages federal resolution to immigration reform. Said federal resolution should compassionately address situations of individuals currently in the country. The KCK Chamber opposes increasing penalties or threatening the business licenses of employers who have unintentionally hired unauthorized workers. So with that as our background, I want to just start generally, your comments on that, and then we can move a little bit more specifically into how that ties into workforce, both from an infrastructure construction aspect, but even beyond that, from a very skilled workforce, talking research and development with pharmaceuticals and you name it, which again, I know has been a discussion. So launch into it. Let's kind of hear your thoughts there.
Oh, thank you. I believe this country needs comprehensive immigration reform. And there are probably multiple components that need to be part of that dialogue, but certainly security is one. I mean, a nation's not a nation without borders, and so security at the border I do think is important. Considering immigration as a workforce issue is right at the center for me in terms of what we need to be thinking about. And then the last thing is, and again, this comes back to just being accountable to taxpayers. We do need to be transparent about the cost of immigration, particularly illegal immigration, when governance fails in this country. And so, I mean, that should be a driver for why we need comprehensive immigration reform. It's clearly broken today. So let me just comment about the most important part for me, which is immigration is a workforce issue. I think that business in this country needs to come together. We need to have a national dialogue regarding, where we have deficits, need workers. So where are existing gaps, and then take into consideration, how that feeds into a plan. Like, we should all have an opinion as to, the types of jobs we're trying to fill, the skills that are needed. If an individual is coming into this country and wants to work and they don't have those skills, how do we create and provide a mechanism for them to gain those skills very, very quickly, to assimilate and, work and be productive in our great country. And so in terms of like the core of what needs to happen, we need a workforce plan related to immigration. And in all the time that I've spent out in this community, walking and talking with all sorts of different types of voters, I think that resonates with people. I think they understand just pragmatically that that's the direction that we need to head. They want to have a legal system. So, and just in general, as a starting point to your question, that's what I believe. We need a comprehensive plan focused on workforce.
And then kind of the tail end of my question there talked about those very highly skilled workers. How do we pave a path for their citizenship? What is a solution to that problem? And really not just for those highly skilled workers, but for a lot of individuals who want to be citizens of this country. Is there a better way? Is the current system we have, does that work? What are your thoughts on? Go ahead.
I think that, again, back to my earlier point on immigration being a workforce issue, for me, it's probably more about creating a legal path for people to, come and work here in multiple areas. I mean, we've got, I've worked for Cerner. I mean, I know I've worked with a lot of tech and innovation companies that clearly have engineering shortages. I've talked with a lot of people that are, whether it be in ag, or I mentioned the construction industry earlier, that have gaps in workforce shortages. So, my view is I want to be able to solve across for all businesses of all sizes in terms of what the needs are in this country. And I think it's, for me, less about citizenship and more about creating a legal path for people to be able to work in this country and to be productive in this country. So maybe I have a little bit of a different viewpoint. I want a legal system for people to come and be able to work, and am a proponent of, increasing the numbers in different categories, but it's not necessarily about citizenship as much as it is about helping U.S. business thrive.
Thank you for that. And kind of a related topic, and we've been dancing around this a little bit, but I want to go back to this work from home issue, which again, it's a big workforce problem. 865,000 women and 216,000 men dropped out of the workforce in September. Of course, not all of those are parents, but a lot of people are saying that experts are saying that people are having to drop out because they're at home with their children, something you have experience with. You've alluded to that. You talked about an education plan subsidy. So I'll offer that up as something that maybe you want to go into a little bit more detail on. We've seen at the state level with federal dollars that came in, the state is beginning to subsidize areas like a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA to kind of be hubs for students to go and do work in a safe environment while they are either in a hybrid or an at-home schooling model right now. Just kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into that. I know you mentioned a lot already, but it's a crucial topic, and especially for this community in this chamber.
No, I'm very happy to go a little bit deeper on that topic. So I think it's important, and I say this as a mother with kids in school, but also as somebody who's worked in healthcare for a long time. Again, I'm just going to restate, I think it's important for children to be in person in school with their teachers and with their parents. I think the learning environment is better. I mean, the social interaction is pretty critical. So with that statement made, in order to do that, it does require for education institutions to have a very strong plan to make sure that kids are in school in a very safe manner and a healthy manner. Here's what we know though, and this is very standard. I mean, I'm getting into CDC guidelines, whether it be for a school district or a business. Kids can go to school and answer questions, with their parents about how they've been feeling and know if they should be there or not. Wearing a mask, social distancing, resetting up, the school itself so that children, have 6 feet proximity in between. Being very transparent with parents, sharing reports as to rates of infection, rates of quarantine, and being very direct in terms of how to identify infection and the steps that a parent should take. There are schools in this broad metro area that have done that very, very successfully for actually since, in some cases, mid-August for those that opened early. It is possible to do it. It is possible to do it with very low incidence of infection. And nothing's perfect, by the way. But I think it's about leadership and planning, and our kids are just that important. And again, I want to emphasize that we need to do it in a safe way. We need to recognize that there are some children, there are reasons why parents may choose otherwise to keep their child at home. Maybe they've got a specific health risk. I mean, it could be any number of things. But we need to, if we really want our economy to thrive and continue to be open, and we want our businesses to be doing well, we also need our children to be in school. And so I'm saying this as somebody who's been both in business and in healthcare, and I'm a parent too. I just think it's that important. Thank you for asking the question.
I guess just one more follow-up, because I think it's important. So we've seen the Kansas State Board of Education say we're not going to sort of put a broad base. We have recommendations, and that's what they are. We've had individual school districts now that have said, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah, which is that's the right decision. I mean, health, and the reason is it's specific actually to healthcare. Healthcare is very local. Infection rates are very local. They occur in zip codes and single schools, and so I do think that education institutions have a lot to learn from each other in terms they can cross collaborate and share ideas in terms of what's working versus not. That's really important. But otherwise, the decision making needs to happen very, very locally, both at the school district, the school level, and then again, I want to emphasize parents being in a position to make decisions too, I think is critically important.
Thank you. That's, I think, something that there has been debate on, is where should that directive come from. I'm going to jump into something that you mentioned that you're intimately familiar with, and that is healthcare. So moving away from COVID for just a second, healthcare in general has, we've seen consumers spend an average of $5,000 on healthcare per year. Out-of-pocket costs have increased over 50% from 2007 to 2017. It's a system that we need to talk about, and we're going to need to talk about it now. We're going to need to talk about it once we are out of this pandemic. So talk to us about Amanda Adkins' healthcare plan and what that looks like.
Sure. Thank you. So just again, as a reminder to everybody, in my work at Cerner, it was focused for 15 years in population health, on improving health and on cutting costs in healthcare. The first thing that I would say is that the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, has done nothing but increase costs in the U.S. healthcare system, and I'm not a supporter of it. I'm sure most of you are well aware that as of mid-November, the Supreme Court will be determining the constitutionality of the ACA. And who knows what will happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but in the event that they made the decision that the ACA in its entirety was unconstitutional, one thing I will tell you, because most of my work has been in chronic disease management, is that I would be an immediate supporter of protecting pre-existing conditions. It's a really important part of who I am and the work that I've done in the healthcare industry. Outside of that, the plan that I wrote and have shared in this community is really focused on three things: making healthcare smarter, more transparent, and more affordable. So when it comes to healthcare being smarter, I know that the most trusted relationship that people have in healthcare is with their provider, their physician, their nurse, whomever is taking care of them. I believe that relationship is critical. It's important alignment. What we really desire is we want that provider to be creating a lifetime plan for health for us. We want them to be incentivized to do care coordination. I think of equal importance, the medical services that are being provided. It's critical that individuals and families and employers have transparency into the overall cost of medical services. And what I know from my own experiences is that ultimately, and this gets to affordability, I think it's critical for individuals and families and employers, because I am a big supporter of employer-sponsored coverage too. We need the power to be in the hands of the individual and family, because they know best what the risks are in their family, how much they want to spend, on their care. And so I have, as a result of that, those are the principles. I've said that I don't support. I think that Obamacare should be repealed. And while there's a lot more detail I could go through that's in the plan, just a couple other things that I think are important. I do know that there are people, who right now are receiving their coverage, through the ACA. And I am a supporter of taking Obamacare subsidies and in a grant form, making sure that states are in a position to take that money and make determinations regarding the types of plans and programs that best fit the state. State healthcare is local. State governments know what the risks are in their state, and it does differ state to state. I've worked across all 50 states in healthcare in this country in determining both the risks that exist, and when it comes to vulnerable populations, making a determination, how they deal with vulnerable populations as well. So I'm a supporter of that. I'm a supporter of raising account-based, like health savings accounts, the limits so that people can contribute a lot more. Again, that's an opportunity, a lot more tax-free, and have more freedom to determine how that money is spent. Again, that just is putting more power in the hands of individual families. And the last thing that I would say, and this really gets to the heart of my experience in healthcare, communities in this country where I've seen the absolute best health outcomes and affordable options and really effective in cutting costs tend to be communities where providers themselves have made a determination that they want to sponsor a plan, which is a big decision because a provider then would be making a decision to take, on risk. It's there, then you really have a direct relationship between the individual family, maybe, employers and that provider. So I also would be definitely a believer that incentivizing more community-based provider plans, with national network wraparounds so people can get services elsewhere if they're traveling, that is a step that would be fantastic for the Kansas City community. We've got great health systems here, wonderful providers. So I think we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity right now, depending on what happens, to create this system that we the people want in this country. And again, there's a lot more on this topic from me at AmandaAdkins2020.com if you want to read the full plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Just, I guess, a quick dovetail off of that, because it has been a very hotly discussed issue on both sides. Talk about smarter, more transparent, more affordable, and the president has talked about it, Republicans have talked about it, Democrats have talked about it as it relates to prescription drugs. Again, a lot of proposals out there. Kind of your thoughts on prescription drugs. We've seen a number of plans before the pandemic. It was a really hotly discussed issue. What does Amanda think about prescription drugs?
Thank you. The opportunity on that one is it's government is payer at the federal level. So clearly the federal government does directly pay for Medicare. And the president took an important step in saying to the pharmaceutical industry that, people have known for a long time that the U.S. does subsidize and pay for drugs at a much higher rate than do other developing countries. And so the president took the step of saying, let's level the playing field, at least for Medicare, where government is payer for a particular program. Let's level the playing field and require that, we get the best possible low rates. And in fairness, because I'm a businesswoman, I do appreciate that he also then gave the opportunity to the pharmaceutical industry to say, well, if you don't like that payment model, come back with an idea. I do like that step that he took. I mean, that's being a responsible payer. I think at the same time, what I would want to understand is the impact to the pharmaceutical industry on innovation and research and development, because I know that there is a lot that does get subsidized based on what the U.S. pays for innovation here in the United States. So I would want to, I think we do need to cut overall cost, seek efficiencies where we can, but I also want to be thoughtful that, you do this over here, and we need to be thoughtful about the implications on innovation, research, and development.
That's all. That is the balancing act there, and that's been a major consideration for both parties. So appreciate you acknowledging that. So we have about 5 minutes remaining. I want to ask one more closing question, and then we'll get into your closing statement. But kind of two things. One, from a macro level, how do you think the 2020 election, just in general, is going to turn out? And then two, do you believe that the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes will repeat a Super Bowl victory this coming football season?
Like the easiest questions ever. So I will remind everybody listening and watching that I served for two terms as the state chair of the Kansas Republican Party. I was also a college Republican state chair. So any good former chair will say nothing, will respond with nothing other than, of course, Republicans are going to win everything. By the way, when I was the state chair, we did win everything. So that's, that's easy, but even easier. Yes, of course, I think that Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs are going to go back to the Super Bowl. And that's just, talk about exciting for the Kansas City community and my own family for that matter. So thank you. Win, win, win.
Yeah, glad to hear some good news finally this year on the Chiefs front. So we'll all be paying attention to that. Amanda, I am going to let you make a closing statement, and then the president and CEO of the Chamber, Daniel Silva, will close us out. So before I conclude, just want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, really informative, and I know the membership thanks you as well. So go ahead and again, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And thank you to the Kansas City, Kansas Chamber. I'm honored that you would ask me to spend time with you today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I would just remind you that I believe that I am a candidate for these times. You know, who would have known when I made the decision to run that we would end up in an economic and a healthcare crisis. But I come to this difficult situation at a major turning point in our country's history with very, very deep experience in both business and healthcare. So I'm positioned and somebody who's been focused on significant impact in this community. And for all of you, again, I would remind you that I've spent a lot of time in Kansas City, Kansas, both in terms of my business experience in the work that I have done for children and families, and will continue to do so. So I'm telling you today that I'm Amanda Adkins. I'm honored to be the Republican candidate for Congress, and I am asking for your vote and for your support. And again, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful to be running right now at this very time. And thanks for the opportunity to be with you.
I'll go ahead and close us out. Ms. Adkins, thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. On behalf of the KCK Chamber Board of Directors, our members, our staff, and community, we appreciate you joining us today. We pride ourselves on creating access, not just for our members, but for our community. And so we do appreciate the time that you spent with us. Stephen, thank you so much for a wonderful job on moderating. You may have a future doing this moving forward. But again, Ms. Adkins, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Good luck.
Thank you. You all take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.